The Galactic Combat Arena was the kind of place where civilizations went to show off their biggest, meanest warriors, and the Vex'nari Empire had been showing off for 300 years straight. Their champion, Zor'kath the Destroyer, stood 7 feet tall with 4 arms that could each bench press a small spacecraft. His kill count was so high they'd stopped updating the scoreboard because it was getting embarrassing for everyone else. Admiral Kriegstal adjusted his ceremonial collar and gazed down at the arena from his luxury box, feeling smugly superior about the whole arrangement. The combat arena wasn't just entertainment, it was diplomacy with style. Nothing said "don't mess with us" quite like watching your champion turn visiting dignitaries into abstract art. "Sir," his aide squeaked, "the human representative has arrived." Kriegstal's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. The humans. Adorable little bipeds who'd barely figured out faster than light travel and thought they belonged at the big kids' table. This would be delicious. The human in question was Jake Martinez, a construction worker from Phoenix who'd been having a perfectly normal Tuesday until a Vex'nari diplomat decided to tour his worksite. Jake had been operating a crane when a gust of wind knocked his hard hat off, sending it flying directly into the alien skull crest. Apparently, this counted as assault on a diplomatic envoy in some circles. A cultural exchange, they'd called it. Jake called it getting railroaded by space lawyers. Now he stood in the arena's preparation chamber, staring at a pamphlet titled "So You're About to Die Horribly, a Beginner's Guide to Vex'nari Combat Sports." The illustrations were not encouraging. "This has got to be some kind of mistake," Jake muttered, flipping through pages that detailed exactly how many ways a 4-armed warrior could dismember him. "I fix bridges. I don't fight whatever the hell that thing is." A nearby Vex'nari technician overheard and chittered with laughter. "No mistake, human. Zor'kath has been looking forward to this. He collects spines from interesting species." Jake looked down at his own spine, suddenly very attached to it. "Great. Just great." The technician handed him a granola bar for energy. "You will need it for the first 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Jake unwrapped the granola bar and took a bite. It tasted like cardboard and impending doom. Through the preparation chamber's viewing window, he could see Zor'kath warming up in the opposite chamber, swinging 4 plasma swords in patterns that defied physics and common sense. "You know what?" Jake said to nobody in particular. "I've had worse Tuesdays." This was a lie, but Jake Martinez had spent 15 years in construction, which meant he was professionally qualified to remain optimistic in the face of obviously terrible situations. He'd survived budget cuts, safety inspectors, and contractors who thought load-bearing was just a suggestion. How hard could one oversized alien be? The arena's speakers crackled to life with Admiral Kriegstal's amplified voice, "Citizens of the Empire. Today we witness the continuation of our glorious tradition as Zor'kath the Destroyer faces his latest challenger." The crowd's roar was deafening. Jake finished his granola bar and crumpled the wrapper. Somehow, he doubted they'd recycling facilities in alien death arenas. The arena's announcer, a Vex'nari with a voice like gravel in a blender, was having the time of his life. In the red corner, standing 7 feet of pure destruction, undefeated in 247 matches, the spine collector himself, Zor'kath the Destroyer. The crowd went absolutely mental. Plasma swords ignited in the stands. Someone set off what Jake hoped were celebratory explosives. In cases. And in the blue corner, the announcer continued, his tone shifting to barely contained giggles, representing the species that invented the safety cone. "We have Jake Martinez." The crowd's response was different. It was the kind of laughter you heard at a comedy show, not a gladiatorial combat. Jake waved awkwardly from his preparation chamber. A few aliens applauded politely, the way you might encourage a toddler's first steps. Dr. Vel Nix, the arena's chief medical officer, was already filling out incident reports in the medical bay. She'd seen a lot of species come through the arena, but humans were notoriously fragile. Soft skin, single hearts, only 2 arms. It was like watching someone bring a paper airplane to a missile fight. Fuck. Estimated time of death? Her assistant asked. I'm being generous and saying 45 seconds, Dr. Velnix replied, selecting a body bag from her supplies. Zor'kath's been in a good mood lately. Meanwhile, in the champion's preparation chamber, Zor'kath was giving his pre-fight interview to the arena's media drone. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, each one capable of crushing Jake's skull like a grape. This human, Zor'kath rumbled, his voice like an earthquake with an attitude problem, represents everything weak about the galaxy. 2 arms. Can you imagine? How does such a species even build shelter? How do they fight? How do they exist? The interviewer nodded enthusiastically. And your strategy for today's match? Strategy. Zor'kath laughed, a sound like boulders having an argument. I will simply stand there and let it run into my swords. Oh, sure. Perhaps I will make it entertaining for the crowd. Maybe I will use only 3 arms. Or 2. Yes, I will fight this human with the same number of arms it has. And more. The crowd will appreciate the irony. Back in the betting booths, the odds were so stacked against Jake that the arena's computer systems had started using scientific notation. The custodial staff were pooling their lunch money to bet on Zor'kath. The concession stand was taking bets on whether Jake would last long enough for the crowd to finish their snacks. 20 credits says the human trips over his own feet, one Vex'nari gambler chirped. 30 says he faints when he sees Zor'kath's swords, another replied. The only creature in the entire arena who wasn't betting against Jake was a maintenance bot, and that was only because maintenance bots weren't programmed for gambling. It was busy checking the arena's structural integrity, running diagnostics on support beams and emergency systems with the methodical precision of a machine that didn't understand the concept of dramatic irony. Jake, meanwhile, had been given a crash course in Vex'nari combat by a bored technician who clearly expected to be mopping up human remains in about an hour. Their joints bend like this, the technician explained, demonstrating with a holographic anatomy display. They have redundant cardiovascular systems here and here. Oh, and their skulls are reinforced with metallic deposits. Anything useful? Jake asked. Like I don't know, weaknesses. The technician thought for a moment. They are very proud. Also, they have never fought a human before, so they have no idea what to expect. Yeah, well, neither do I, Jake muttered, strapping on armor that had clearly been designed for someone with a completely different skeletal structure. The helmet kept sliding down over his eyes, and the chest plate made him look like a sad turtle. The arena's countdown timer hit 60 seconds. Jake picked up his assigned weapon, a basic training sword that looked like it had been forged by someone who'd heard about swords but never actually seen one. This is it, he said to himself. Time to see if 15 years of construction work taught me anything useful. The crowd's roar reached fever pitch as the arena doors began to open. The arena doors opened with a dramatic hiss, and Zor'kath the Destroyer made his entrance like he was auditioning for an action movie. 4 plasma swords blazed to life, each one humming with enough energy to cut through starship hull plating. He struck a pose that would have looked ridiculous on anyone else but somehow worked when you had 4 arms and an ego the size of a small moon. The crowd lost their collective minds. Plasma swords waved in the stands. Someone started a chant that roughly translated to death to the soft pink thing. Then Jake walked out. He looked like a kid wearing his dad's work clothes. The armor was so loose it rattled when he moved. His helmet sat crooked on his head, and he carried his training sword like he was holding a pool cue at a fancy restaurant and wasn't quite sure what to do with it. The crowd's bloodthirsty roar faded to confused murmuring. Is that supposed to be intimidating? Someone asked. Bah. Zor'kath sized up his opponent and couldn't help but laugh. This is what Earth sends to challenge me. I have fought battle-hardened warriors from across the galaxy, and they send me a creature that looks like it got dressed in the dark. Jake adjusted his helmet, which immediately slid back down over his eyes. Yeah, well, you look like you raided a discount sword store and couldn't make up your mind. The arena fell silent. Nobody had ever trash-talked Zor'kath before. It wasn't that it was forbidden, it was just that most opponents were too busy trying not to die to engage in witty banter. Zor'kath's 4 eyes narrowed. "You dare mock me?" "I'm not mocking you," Jake replied, pushing his helmet back up. "I'm just saying, 4 swords seems like overkill. What's next, 5? 6? Where does it end? Do you just keep adding swords until you run out of hands?" This was not how these fights usually went. Typically, opponents would charge at Zor'kath with their traditional battle cries, and he would cut them down with practiced efficiency. Nobody had ever questioned his sword count before. Zor'kath decided to end this embarrassment quickly. He lunged forward with all 4 blades, executing a move that had never failed to instantly dismember his opponents. Jake, who had spent 15 years dodging falling construction materials, dropped flat on his face. The plasma swords whistled through the air where Jake's head had been a second earlier. Zor'kath stumbled, thrown off balance by striking nothing but air. "Interesting technique," Admiral Krixtal muttered from his viewing box. "Is that some sort of human combat form?" "I think he tripped," his aide replied. Jake rolled sideways as Zor'kath's swords came down again, this time aimed at where he'd been lying. The arena floor sparked and sizzled where the plasma blade struck. "Stop moving." Zor'kath roared. "Stop trying to kill me." Jake shot back, scrambling to his feet. This was definitely not standard arena protocol. The crowd was utterly confused. Some were cheering, some were booing, and a few were placing new bets on whether this was some kind of elaborate comedy routine. Jake backed away from Zor'kath's next assault, his eyes scanning the arena like he was surveying a job site. The space was roughly circular, with high walls lined with spectator seats. Support columns rose from the arena floor to the ceiling. Emergency exits were marked with glowing symbols, standard structural engineering stuff. "You know," Jake said, continuing to backpedal as Zor'kath advanced, "this place has terrible safety ratings. Who designed this? The supports are all wrong for the load distribution." "What are you talking about?" Zor'kath snarled. "I'm talking about basic engineering principles. See that column there? It's carrying way more weight than it should, and don't get me started on the emergency egress. This whole place is one workplace accident away from a lawsuit." Zor'kath paused his attack, genuinely baffled. In 300 years of arena combat, nobody had ever critiqued the architecture. The crowd was beginning to take sides. About half were still cheering for Zor'kath, but a growing number were getting curious about this weird human who treated mortal combat like a safety inspection. Is he actually fighting?" Dr. Vel Nix asked from the medical bay, watching the monitors in fascination. "I'm not sure," her assistant replied, "but he's lasted longer than anyone expected." "Ah." Jake noticed a loose grating near one of the support columns. His construction worker instincts kicked in. Never leave a job site hazard unaddressed. Seriously, he called out to Zor'kath. Someone could get hurt in here. Zor'kath was starting to get annoyed, which was dangerous for everyone involved. He'd been the Empire's champion for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have a fight last more than 2 minutes. This ridiculous human kept dodging and talking and pointing out structural deficiencies like he was filing an inspector's report. "Stand still and fight like a warrior," Zor'kath bellowed, launching into a spinning attack that would have looked impressive in a movie but was tactically questionable in real life. Jake, who had spent years watching crane operators try to look fancy and hurt themselves, recognized showboating when he saw it. He stepped back, let Zor'kath's momentum carry him past, and then casually stuck out his foot. The great Zor'kath the Destroyer, undefeated champion of the Vex'nari Empire, tripped over a construction worker's boot and went sprawling across the arena floor. 2 of his plasma swords skittered away, their energy fields flickering. The crowd went dead silent. "Oops," Jake said. "Sorry about that. Safety first, you know. Can't have people running around with sharp objects." Zor'kath scrambled to his feet, his face turning a color that Jake's hard hat manual would have classified as warning orange. This was humiliating. He was being made to look like an amateur by a creature that didn't even have proper armor. You dare use trickery against me? Trickery? Jake retrieved one of the dropped plasma swords, examining it like a power tool he'd never seen before. This is just basic workplace safety. You don't run with scissors, you don't operate heavy machinery without proper training, and you definitely don't wave around 4 energy weapons at once without considering the consequences. He pressed what looked like a power button on the plasma sword. It hummed to life, and Jake nodded approvingly. Nice balance. Probably costs more than my truck. Admiral Kriegstal was leaning forward in his viewing box, no longer confident in the outcome. This is unprecedented. In the crowd, the betting was getting frantic. The odds were shifting so fast the bookmakers couldn't keep up. Aliens who had never heard of humans were now chanting Jake's name. Dr. Velnix had abandoned her body bag preparations and was taking notes instead. Fascinating. The human appears to be treating this as some sort of problem-solving exercise rather than combat. Jake continued his analysis of the arena while Zor'kath caught his breath. You know what this place needs? Better lighting and maybe some non-slip surfaces. This floor is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Stop talking about construction. Zor'kath roared. Why? It's what I know. Jake pointed at a support beam with the plasma sword. See that? That beam is under way too much stress. The load calculations are all wrong. One good impact and the whole section could come down. He wasn't just making conversation. Jake's eyes were tracking sight lines, calculating angles, and identifying every structural weakness in the arena. 15 years of construction work had trained him to see buildings as systems, not just empty spaces. Zor'kath charged again, but this time Jake was ready. Instead of dodging randomly, he moved with purpose, leading the champion in a specific direction. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to position Zor'kath exactly where Jake wanted him. You're getting predictable, Jake called out, weaving between support columns, always the same attack pattern. 4 swords, big wind up, lots of flash. You know what we call that in construction? All show, no substance. The psychological warfare was working. Zor'kath had never faced an opponent who critiqued his technique while avoiding it. His attacks were becoming wilder, less controlled. His legendary precision was cracking under the pressure of Jake's running commentary. And another thing, Jake continued, now using the plasma sword to point at various parts of the arena like a teacher with a laser pointer. Your footwork is terrible. You're putting all your weight on your front legs, which leaves you completely off balance when you commit to an attack. I have been fighting for 3 centuries, Zor'kath snarled. Yeah, and you've been making the same mistakes for 3 centuries. Nobody ever told you because they were too busy dying. Admiral Kriegstal watched in growing amazement as his champion, the terror of the galaxy, it was being systematically deconstructed by a human with a hard hat and an opinion about proper safety protocols. The crowd was now fully invested in Jake's victory. They'd never seen anything like this tactical demolition of their supposedly invincible champion. Jake grinned and tapped the plasma sword against his helmet. Ready for the finale? Jake had spent the entire fight setting up his master plan, and Zor'kath had been too angry to notice. Every dodge, every comment about structural integrity, every seemingly random movement had been designed to maneuver the champion into exactly the right position. You know what your biggest weakness is? Jake called out, backing toward the support column he'd identified earlier. My only weakness is that I am too merciful. Zor'kath roared, raising all 4 plasma swords for a finishing blow that would finally end this embarrassment. Nope, Jake said cheerfully. Your biggest weakness is that you've never worked construction. Zor'kath lunged forward with everything he had, all 4 swords aimed at Jake's center mass. It was a perfect killing blow, the kind of attack that had ended hundreds of fights before. Jake stepped aside at the last possible second. All 4 plasma swords struck the support column Jake had been analyzing. The stressed beam, already carrying more weight than it was designed for, couldn't handle the additional energy discharge from 4 plasma weapons simultaneously striking its base. The column cracked with a sound like thunder. Oh no, Admiral Kriegstal whispered from his viewing box. The support column collapsed, bringing down a section of the arena's upper structure in a cascade of debris and sparks. Emergency alarms began blaring. Dust filled the air. The crowd scrambled for the exits. When the dust settled, Zor'kath was trapped under a pile of rubble, conscious but completely immobilized. His 4 plasma swords lay scattered around him, their energy fields flickering and dying. Jake stood nearby, somehow untouched by the collapse. His hard hat had protected him from falling debris. His construction experience had told him exactly where to stand to avoid the worst of it. Structural failure, Jake announced to the shocked crowd. "I warned you about the load distribution." Zor'kath stared up at him from the rubble, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. You destroyed the arena." "I didn't destroy anything," Jake corrected. "I just pointed out that your swords were sharper than your building inspector. This was an accident waiting to happen." Slowly, deliberately, Zor'kath opened his hands and let his remaining plasma sword fall to the arena floor. The sound it made hitting the debris was barely audible over the emergency alarms, but everyone in the arena heard it. The undefeated champion had dropped his weapon. I yield," Zor'kath said quietly. The crowd erupted. Not in the bloodthirsty roar they'd started with, but in genuine amazement. They'd just witnessed the impossible. A human construction worker had defeated the Empire's greatest champion without throwing a single punch. Jake walked over to Zor'kath and extended his hand. "You fought well. Just maybe work on your situational awareness next time." Zor'kath, trapped and defeated, stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "You are not what I expected, human." Jake corrected. "And yeah, I get that a lot." Dr. Vel Nix was already rushing into the arena with her medical team, her scientific curiosity completely overriding her professional pessimism. Admiral Krixtal sat in his viewing box, mouth agape, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. In the crowd, aliens were celebrating like their favorite underdog sports team had just won the championship, which, Jake supposed, was exactly what had happened. Emergency crews were securing the damaged section of the arena. Jake supervised, offering helpful suggestions about temporary supports and proper debris removal procedures. "Just a typical Tuesday," he muttered to himself, adjusting his hard hat. The arena's announcer, still trying to process what he'd just witnessed, managed to stammer out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new champion." It came out as a question, because nobody was quite sure what to call what had just happened. Jake looked around at the cheering crowd, the collapsed structure, and the defeated warrior who was now being carefully extracted from the rubble by medical teams. "I think I'm going to need a bigger hard hat," he said. The diplomatic incident that followed Jake's victory was unlike anything in the Empire's recorded history. Within hours, news of the human who'd defeated Zor'kath without actually fighting had spread across 17 star systems. The arena footage was being analyzed by military strategists, structural engineers, and philosophers who were trying to figure out if they'd just witnessed combat or performance art. Admiral Krixtal found himself in the uncomfortable position of explaining to the High Command how their supposedly invincible champion had been defeated by a species they'd classified as harmlessly primitive. "Let me understand this correctly," High Commander Vex'nari said over the emergency holoconference. "A human construction worker destroyed our champion by critiquing our architecture. Technically, he defeated our champion by demonstrating superior tactical awareness and exploiting structural weaknesses that our engineers had overlooked," Krixtal replied, trying to put the best possible spin on the situation. He made Zor'kath trip over his own feet. That was strategically sound misdirection. Meanwhile, Jake sat in the arena's medical bay while Dr. Vel Nix conducted the most thorough examination of a human being in galactic history. She was fascinated by everything about him, from his binocular vision to his apparent ability to analyze complex structural systems at a glance. "Your species is remarkable," she said, scanning his brain activity. "Your neural pathways show incredible adaptation to three-dimensional problem solving, and your stress responses are completely different from anything we've encountered." "I just fix bridges," Jake said for the 20th time. This is way more excitement than I usually get. But how did you know the support column would fail? Jake shrugged. 15 years of looking at buildings that shouldn't be standing up but somehow are. You develop an eye for these things. Plus, your construction standards are terrible. No offense. Just say. Dr. Vel Nix made another note. Fascinating. You approached combat as an engineering problem rather than a physical confrontation. Everything's an engineering problem if you think about it right. In the depths of the arena's medical facility, Zor'kath was recovering from his injuries and his wounded pride. The physical damage was minor, a few bruises, some strained joints from being trapped under debris. The psychological damage was more complex. I don't understand, he said to Dr. Vel Nix when she came to check on him. I am the greatest warrior in the Empire. I have studied every known combat form. How did a creature with no training defeat me? Because he wasn't fighting you, Dr. Vel Nix explained. He was solving you. Like a puzzle. The news crews arrived next, followed by diplomatic envoys, military analysts, and what appeared to be an entire university's worth of researchers who wanted to study the human who'd revolutionized combat theory by treating it as a workplace safety issue. Jake handled the attention with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. When asked about his victory, he gave patient explanations about load-bearing structures and the importance of proper safety protocols. When asked about his combat training, he mentioned a CPR certification he'd gotten 3 years ago. The secret, he told a room full of military strategists, is that there's no secret. You just have to pay attention to what's actually happening instead of what you think should be happening. The Empire's offer came the next day. High Commander Vex'nari herself appeared via hologram to offer Jake a position as Chief Strategic Consultant for the Imperial Fleet. Your unique perspective could revolutionize our military doctrine, she explained. We could offer you rank, wealth, your own ship. Jake listened politely, then shook his head. Thanks, but I've got a bridge to finish back home. The contractor's already behind schedule, and if I don't get back soon, the whole project's going to fall apart. You're turning down a position that would make you one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy too. Build a bridge. It's a really important bridge, Jake said seriously. It connects two parts of the city that have been cut off from each other for years. People need that bridge. High Commander Vex'nari stared at him for a long moment, then began laughing. It was a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane, but it was definitely laughter. Dr. Vel Nix was right, she said finally. Your species is remarkable. Jake was escorted back to his transport ship with full military honors, which he found embarrassing but didn't want to be rude about. As his ship prepared for departure, he looked back at the arena through the viewport. Nice place, he said to the pilot. Just needs better building codes. 3 months later, the Vex'nari Empire quietly began implementing new arena safety standards. 6 months after that, they started recruiting construction workers from various species to serve as tactical consultants. And somewhere in Phoenix, Jake Martinez was back to his regular routine of fixing bridges and occasionally dodging falling construction materials, blissfully unaware that military academies across the galaxy were now teaching courses in applied construction theory and structural combat analysis. His hard hat sat on his workbench, slightly dented from alien debris but still perfectly functional, just the way he liked it. The bridge got finished ahead of schedule,